Hey everybody, it's John from Tinker Crafts and Travels, and I'm coming to you today with a tutorial video on how I made this inlay cutting board. We start off cutting our boards to length. This is walnut. I'm running it through the planer, getting all of my boards down to the same dimension. Now I'm going to run one side through the joiner planer so that when I put it through the table saw, I've got one straight side already. Now I'm cutting all the boards down to smaller boards that are only 2 inches wide. And then I've cut them into 12-inch lengths. I've got maple and I've got walnut. The maple I'll be using for my inlay, and the walnut I'll be using for the actual cutting board. I have a leftover piece of cherry that I'm going to be using for the other part of the inlay. The inlay is going to have 2 layers. This maple inlay I'm making right now, I actually ended up not using. Look closely, you can see there's a major difference in the color tone of these maple boards that I had not expected and was not looking for. So I ended up milling and planing more maple. I actually ended up milling and planing more cherry too, because this project had a couple of mistakes in it for me, so I had to redo some parts. But showing the basic concept of what it would have looked like if I had got it right on the first try. So this is just surfacing the walnut and the maple, getting them nice and even, because at the time I started this project, I did not have a drum sander. So I had to surface everything on the CNC. I'm running one edge through the joiner planer here so that it can, when I put it on my router sled, I know I've got one good flat edge to put up against the sled. Alright, now I'm running the walnut through the table saw using my sled, cutting them down to 1 5/8 inches. I am turning the table saw off in between these cuts. This is me doing the maple. I'm cutting these to 3/4 inch. Even though I didn't actually use this particular maple because I didn't like the color, it was still the same process when I redid it. And when I had to fix mistakes, I ended up having to do this same thing, same process with the cherry, but pretty much no matter what wood you're using, it's a similar process, trimming it down to Endgrain. The thicker pieces you want for your cutting board, but when you're doing the inlays, we'll get into it later, I only go 1/4 inch deep, so you don't want to use up a lot of material when you only really need 1/4 inch. Now it's a similar process again, only this time I am facing the Endgrain upwards, and I've tried to arrange it to where every 2 pieces kind of opens like a book, and that creates a nice visual effect. So as I was cutting it, I kept everything together in the same order that I sliced it. That way when I got ready to glue it, you could just open each one up, and that gives it that nice pretty pattern. If I had been more careful when I was cutting it on the miter saw and kept everything together as I was cutting into 12-inch pieces, I feel like I could have done a little more with that pattern, but maybe next time. Alright, so now I'm surfacing it and getting ready for the first carve. Surfacing both sides here. And now we're carving. And I'm carving in a triquetra, something simple since this is my first 2-layer inlay carve. I did several during Christmas for some family members, and I had settings that I use that I got from some other YouTubers, and I thought they were working great because they look good on the surface, but I discovered that there were some problems with them as we get further into this. But this is the original first carve. Some of these videos are from, it took me 3 tries to get this whole thing right, so some of these carves are from different phases, and I did that because there's different things to talk about with each one. But this was the same on all 3 carves. It's 25 or 0.25 inches flat depth V carve with an 8-inch nth meal and a 15-degree V bit, which I'll be putting links for in the description. And this is the part where it's just shaping the edges with the V bit. The end mill does most of the work on this carve. Alright, this is the first time that I carved the maple, and one of the issues I had with this one was I created my own edge for it instead of just offsetting the farthest vector. And in the later carves, the later attempts, that's how I did it, and it worked a whole lot better than drawing my own little crooked triangle, because as you can see here, it doesn't finish over in this corner because I didn't quite get it to 1/8 of an inch, so my V bit had to carve that out, and I didn't really like that. It took a lot longer. Obviously this is a sped up version, but overall I think most of the carves were around 8 minutes. That first female carve on the cutting board was the longest one at 40 minutes. And again, that didn't change. That was the same thing every time I had to. The other 2 times it was the same time. So what I did wrong here was I had used numbers from videos where people were using a ball nose V-bit, and I'm using a 15-degree bit that comes almost to an exact point. It's got a flat tip of 0.3 millimeters. So because of the difference, the numbers they were using the 0.25 female flat depth or max depth cut. But when they did the male end, they would do 0.20 start depth and a 0.05 max depth. And so I was using the same thing, and it turned out looking great for me. But when I did the second carve, I discovered that it was creating a problem because of the fact that my bit was close to a complete 15-degree bit. So what I ended up changing it to was a 0.24 start depth and a 0.01 max depth. And that gave me the least amount of gap at the bottom while still working where I was able to get the inlay in. I don't have a press, so I was just using weights, but I still got a good result. And when I carved it out the second time, I didn't have that gap anymore underneath. I didn't have that void underneath. And this is the second time. This time too, the first time I carved it out, another mistake that added to my problems was I ended up going 0.001 into the surface. And the second time I just cleared it out far above the surface so that wouldn't happen. And then on this one, this is also a mistake. It was a Saturday. I was trying to multitask, doing yard work, and I ended up putting the male settings on the female carve. And I tried to figure out a way to fix it that wasn't going to end up with all kinds of problems that was going to drive me crazy every time I looked at it. And there was no way. I ended up having to recarve the whole thing. So you can see just the edges of this maple here are just a little bit thinner than what they should have been. Now this is the final carve, I believe. We'll see. I'll know by the edge whether I offset it or if this is... Okay, no, this is the original carve I did on the cherry. And it's the same. These are the wrong settings. This was the one at 0.20 instead of 0.25. But to the naked eye, it looks the same. As I got to the end of this project, there were times that I forgot to hit record and just felt like I've got a recording of me doing almost the exact same thing, so I didn't make another one. But yeah, you'll notice when it's clearing the plug that the outside edge is a lot more defined, and it was far more efficient on my tool paths doing it that way than the way I'm doing it right here. But again, those settings were 0.24 start depth and 0.01 max depth. But I also made a video where I did the whole inlay storyboard trying to figure out what I did wrong. And if you're interested in figuring out why we're doing these start depths the way they are and why bits are different, why it's different for every machine, and why you should always do an inlay storyboard before every carve, that's the video that you want to watch there. Alright, so I've glued it together. It's sat overnight, just like all of it. Every glue up I let sit overnight to make sure it was good and cured before I stressed it with the router like this. And this is the last and final tool path to clear this plug. And I did it above the surface again, just to make sure that I wasn't removing any material that I didn't want to remove. And now I have bought a drum sander by the end of this project, and I've gotten to use it, and it has given me some great results and really saved me a whole lot of time on the sanding process too, compared to the cutting boards I made during Christmas. So the last touch, putting that final juice groove in. now we put on a good audio book and get to sanding. For maybe an hour it took me to sand it, which was a whole lot faster than, probably took me 3 hours to sand it during Christmas time. And now the money shot, putting a little oil on it. I might have gotten a little too heavy with the oil here, trying to make it look extra dramatic, but yeah. You don't need this much oil when it comes to this walrus oil. And I ended up being able to spread this out over the entire board, but yeah, it creates a dramatic effect when you do it this way. There we go, sitting on my kitchen counter, ready to be put to use.